The wind howled across the lonely prairie like a wounded animal, rattling the thin wooden walls of Maria Dalton's small cabin. Snow fell in thick sheets, turning the world outside into a frozen blur. Maria stood by the window, hugging her worn shawl around her shoulders, wondering how she would survive another winter night with almost nothing left in the cupboard. Then she heard it. A knock. Not the gentle kind. A desperate one. Her heart skipped. No one ever came this far out into the plains, especially not in the middle of a storm like this. For a moment she thought it might just be the wind. But then the knock came again, louder, urgent. Maria hesitated. She was a poor widow living alone, and the world had not always been kind to women who trusted strangers. But the storm outside was merciless. She slowly opened the door. Standing there was a tall man, covered in snow from head to boots. His dark hat was pulled low over tired eyes, and his coat looked worn from miles of travel. He looked strong, but the cold had clearly gotten to him. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from the wind. "I hate to trouble you, but my horse gave out about a mile back. I've been walking through this storm. Could I stay here tonight, just until morning?" Maria looked at him carefully. A stranger. A cowboy. And she had almost nothing to offer. But she also remembered something her late mother used to say: kindness is the only wealth that grows when you give it away. Maria stepped aside and opened the door wider. "You'd better come in before you freeze." Relief washed across the man's face. "Thank you," he said quietly. Inside the cabin, the air was warm from a small fire burning in the stone hearth. The room was simple, just a wooden table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and shelves with a few jars of preserved food. The man removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair and tired but kind eyes. He looked around the humble room, clearly noticing how little Maria had. "My name's Daniel," he said. "Maria," she replied. She handed him a towel and pointed toward the fire. "You should warm up." Daniel held his hands close to the flames, sighing as the warmth slowly returned to his frozen fingers. Maria opened the cupboard and frowned. There wasn't much, just a small loaf of bread and the last of her vegetable stew. It had been meant to last her 2 days. She stared at it for a moment. Then she poured it into 2 bowls. Daniel noticed immediately. "You don't have to share," he said gently. "I can make do." Maria shook her head. No one should go hungry on a night like this. They ate quietly at the small wooden table. The stew was simple, but to Daniel it tasted like the finest meal he had eaten in weeks. "You live out here alone?" he asked. Maria nodded. "My husband passed 3 years ago. The farm failed after that, but this cabin was all we had left." Daniel studied her face. Despite the hardship written in every corner of the room, Maria carried herself with quiet dignity. "You must be strong," he said. Maria gave a soft, tired smile. Sometimes strength just means getting through the next day. Outside, the storm grew worse. The wind screamed across the plains and snow piled against the door. Daniel glanced at the single bed. "You take the bed," Maria said before he could speak. "I'll sleep by the fire." "No," Daniel replied quickly. "I can sleep on the floor." Maria crossed her arms. "You're the guest." Daniel chuckled softly. "You're stubborn." "So I've been told." Eventually they settled on a compromise. Maria would take the bed, and Daniel would sleep on a blanket near the fireplace. Before blowing out the lantern, Maria spoke quietly. "I'm sorry it's not much." Daniel looked around the small cabin again. The worn furniture. The patched curtains. The empty shelves. And yet she had shared everything she had without hesitation. "It's more than enough," he said softly. Morning came with a quiet golden sunrise over the snow-covered plains. Maria woke early and stepped outside. The storm had passed. When she returned, Daniel was already awake, putting on his coat. "I should head out," he said. Maria nodded. She packed the last pieces of bread into a cloth and handed it to him. "For the road." Daniel looked at the bundle, then at her. "You should keep it." "I'll manage," she said firmly. He hesitated, then accepted it. "Thank you, for everything." Maria smiled politely. "Safe travels, Daniel." He stepped out the door, tipped his hat, and disappeared down the snowy road. Maria closed the door and returned to her quiet life. Days passed. Then weeks. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the land. One afternoon, Maria was outside chopping wood when she heard the distant sound of horses. Not one, many. She turned toward the road. A line of riders approached, kicking up dust as they came closer. At the front rode a familiar figure. Daniel. But he looked very different. His coat was new. His horse was strong and beautiful. Behind him rode several well-dressed men. Maria stood frozen as they stopped in front of her cabin. Daniel dismounted and walked toward her. "Hello again, Maria." She stared at the group of riders behind him. "What's going on?" Daniel smiled. "There's something I didn't tell you." One of the men behind him stepped forward holding a leather folder. Maria's confusion deepened. Daniel looked at her kindly. "The truth is, I'm not just a traveler." He paused. "My name is Daniel Carter." Maria blinked. She had heard that name before. Everyone in the region had. Daniel Carter was one of the richest ranch owners in the entire state. Millionaire, she whispered. Daniel nodded. "I travel across my land every winter. I like to see how people really live. That night, my horse actually did collapse in the storm, and I had nowhere else to go." Maria crossed her arms, embarrassed. "I'm sorry if the cabin wasn't." Daniel interrupted gently. "It was the warmest place I've ever stayed." He turned and gestured toward the riders behind him. They began unloading tools, lumber, and supplies. Maria frowned. "What are they doing?" Daniel looked back at her. "You shared your last meal with a stranger," he said quietly. "You gave shelter without asking for anything in return." He handed her the leather folder. Inside were papers, property deeds, construction plans, and a bank document. "I'm rebuilding your farm," Daniel said. Maria's hands trembled. "What? A new house, a barn, livestock, and enough money to make sure you never struggle again." Tears filled Maria's eyes. "You can't do that." Daniel smiled. "Kindness like yours is rare. And rare things should be protected." Maria wiped her tears. "I didn't help you because I expected something." "I know," Daniel said softly. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Construction began that very week. Within months, Maria's small broken cabin had been replaced by a beautiful farmhouse surrounded by green fields and new livestock. But the most surprising change wasn't the land. It was Daniel. He visited often, at first to check on the progress, then simply to talk. They shared meals, laughed, walked across the fields together. And slowly, the lonely prairie that once held only hardship began to feel like home again. One evening, as the sun set over the golden plains, Daniel turned to Maria and said something that made her heart stop. "You once saved me from a storm," he said. Maria smiled. "You were never really in danger." Daniel shook his head. "I was." He looked into her eyes. "Just not the kind you could see." Maria waited. Daniel took a deep breath. "I had all the money in the world, but no one who truly cared about me." He paused. "Until I knocked on your door." Maria's eyes softened. "Then I guess we both found something that night." Daniel smiled. "Yes," he said. "We did." And from that cold winter night when a poor woman opened her door to a stranger, a new life began. One built not on wealth, but on the simple power of kindness.